Hi there, I'm Erin Brown, New Line's North Africa editor, and welcome back to another special Christmas and holiday episode of The Lead. 2025 has been a memorable year in so many ways, sometimes for the better, often in less positive ways. But I have with me today an elite team of New Line's editors with whom we'll be looking back on the year in our own unique way. First, let me introduce my guests. You've heard each of them on the podcast before, and we'll start with New Line's Europe editor, Lisa Goldman. Hey, Lisa.
Hi, Erin. Nice to be here.
And the magazine's South Asia editor, Surbi Gupta.
Hi, Erin.
Hi, just good to have you. And none other than our Middle East editor, Mr. Kareem Shahin. How's it going, Kareem?
Hey, lovely to be here with all of you at the end of the year again.
Yeah. So I wanted this year to do a little bit of something different. And in the spirit of The Sound of Music, I think we're going to do an episode a little bit about our favorite things. I also wanted to give us a little bit of an insight into what it is like at our wonderful Monday meetings, the same day that the podcast usually goes out. Our entire editorial team joins a weekly meeting in which we are supposed to discuss our upcoming schedule and possible story ideas. But if we are honest, it often collapses into a wonderful discussion about what we've been watching or listening to or an event we've been to. We're a remote team, and so it's our moment to catch up and hear what all of our interesting colleagues are up to. So this year, we wanted to do a little bit of reflecting on some of our favorite things. We're going to talk about some of our favorite New Lines essays, some things that have happened in culture that have really moved us or been instrumental in the year, and a surprise lightning round of little thingies that we've discovered in 2025 that have made our lives better. So without further ado, let's hop in. So let's start with our favorite New Lines stories of the year. I know this is always a hard one for us when we're coming down to it. And Lisa, you've got a story for us. Do you want to set us up with your favorite piece of the year?
Yes, as you say, it's really hard to choose. I was pretty hard pressed, and I initially was going to go with something lighthearted, but I'm basically a person who wallows in the darkness. So I chose a piece that I commissioned and I think is underlooked. It's by Rida Abu Rass, and it's called "A Palestinian Citizen of Israel Reflects on Life in the Shadow of Genocide in Gaza," which is a bit of a mouthful. But I would say, look, Rida's piece is very interesting because he's a Palestinian citizen of Israel, as he writes, and he lives abroad now. He's lived abroad for 20 years. And he describes a visit he made back to Israel, where he was born and raised this past summer. And because his father was having surgery and he wanted to be with him. It's a very complex, humanistic, insightful analysis of contemporary Israeli society and of the position of Palestinian citizens of Israel, who are quite uniquely placed, as he certainly is, because he's completely bilingual and has no accent when he speaks Hebrew. And his closest friends are Israeli Jews. Those are his high school friends. I think it's a really terrific piece, and he offers some speculation as to the future of that really torn place based on the position of Palestinians in Israeli society today.
Yeah. You know, I actually went back and reread this piece today, and it is so interesting. One of the things that I had sort of always known that there are Palestinian citizens of Israel, but to me, I think what was so fascinating about this is, in a way, it was almost... The thing that stood out to me was it was almost like he was moving through this place that we hear so much about and that we have kind of perhaps a fixed idea of what it looks like in our minds as almost incognito. And he got such an interesting look at the place where he was born and raised, but from a completely different angle. And I'm curious, you spend a lot of time in Israel and the West Bank, and I'm sure you know folks like this who are Palestinian citizens of Israel. What overall is that experience like? And what does the author kind of show us what are some details that stood out to you from his piece that kind of help us understand what that reality is?
Right. So it's very complex, obviously, as everything in that region is. But, what stands out for me is one scene in the essay where he describes the hospital where his father was undergoing heart surgery.
Oh, I loved this one. Yeah.
Right? It's very interesting. What people don't know is that Palestinian citizens of Israel are very prominent in the healthcare provider profession. Doctors, surgeons, nurses, every hospital. I remember once I broke my leg and the doctor who put my cast on was called Dr. Arafat. There was another time when during the 2006 Lebanon war when one of the most prominent surgeons at a hospital in the north was a Dr. Nasrallah. So at this particular hospital, which is actually an expensive private hospital, which is rare in Israel's public healthcare system, because it's a private business and because the Israeli government traditionally imposes significant fines on private businesses that impose mandatory work days on Jewish citizens on the Sabbath, when he went to visit his father on the Sabbath in this private hospital, Rida discovered that every single person working in that place, from the chief physicians to the security guards, were Palestinians, and that the language of the hospital on Saturday was Arabic. And this is in the middle of the genocide in Gaza. The television in the reception room was tuned to Channel 14, which, is Fox News on steroids, with the news presenters making hair-raising threats against Palestinians. And meanwhile, everybody taking care of the patients is a Palestinian, but they're all citizens of Israel.
Yeah, I thought that was so fascinating. Just also his initial description of the hospital, that it was quite a mix of characters, everyone from, Palestinian doctors to Zionist Israeli nurses and technicians. And it was such a fascinating read. And I thought a really great look at these kind of complex intercommunal dynamics.
Yes, I think that's so important that you highlighted that, and so, so perceptive, that on the days that weren't the Sabbath, the day before his father was to undergo his surgery, Rida describes this parade of healthcare providers who come to his father's bedside. Now, these people outside the hospital, they have rapidly opposing political views. You have, a nurse who is a religious settler from the West Bank, a physician who's a left-wing liberal Jewish Israeli, the man who comes to take blood samples is a settler, and all these people are working collaboratively inside the hospital. And I don't want to at all present this as some kind of romantic idea of peace, love, and kumbaya, but I just think it sheds some light on the complexity of reality, of lived reality, of how people live their lives within a situation that looks quite binary from the outside.
Yeah, no, I think that is one of the biggest takeaways here, is that these kind of really complex dynamics are constantly in flux, and that it is not nearly as rigid or as segregated as we might think Israel to be. That there are a lot of places where these different identities come up against each other and have to interact. And yeah, I thought it was super interesting.
I'm glad. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And speaking of complex intercommunal dynamics, Surbi, I think you've got quite an interesting story for us from your beat this year. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, actually, when I was thinking about which my favorite essay was in 2025, I, picked, and I think it was a no-brainer. It was the South Asian vote that maybe split for Zohran Mamdani in New York City. And I think what I liked was that a lot of mainstream press, or in general, the assumption is that, because a politician is South Asian, that the community will vote for him. But what the essay told us was that how messy, layered, and even contradictory the nature of the South Asian political life is in the United States. And we saw that, with so many people voting for Trump last year. And now, because the election is done, we saw that the same people voted for Zohran this year. This essay kind of started this collaboration between the magazine and the writer Yashica Dutt. And, we've done so many stories since, looking at the Hindu voters, caste, in general, the campaign at large. So I think that was a defining moment for me as an editor this year.
One of the things that I loved about this and all of our Zohran Mamdani coverage was that it took things that that I think a lot of mainstream publications took for granted and really examined it in a new way. I'm wondering, as you mentioned, we did a ton of stories with Yashica as well. As you were thinking about kind of the through line and the thread that you guys pulled on in your coverage of Zohran Mamdani, what was one of the major themes that you saw?
I think the through line was, and what really stood out to me was, I think this was truly the most South Asian election that we had seen in the United States. We have had a lot of, like, of course, members and leaders from the community who are in office, but just the nature of the campaign, because it was just so vibrant and so dynamic. And earlier you saw even Zohran was not emphasizing on his identity as much. But then when we published this piece which spoke about how even so many within the community did not know who he was, we saw like a direct impact that how he was like reaching out to the community. We saw so many publications then do stories on the community. So, we moved the needle, which we always want to do with our coverage. And I think just how then, the opposition that he found from within the community, how that led to so many, like all the different candidates in the city, like then reach out to Hindu voters. And then, how that kind of opened up the conversation on caste. But in general, the small and the large things that he hosted a dinner with taxi drivers and healthcare workers, basically nighttime workers in Jackson Heights. When I was there, I saw it, like how it spotlighted the community, I think, in all its different ways, and how the diversity within it, the Pakistani, Bangladeshis, Nepalese. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, I lived in New York City for 15 years. And one of the things that I came to understand really quickly is that the kind of broad groups that politicians can tend to like lump people into are not at all reliable voting blocks. And so to see somebody really like get in there and figure out what the sticky bits were in different communities, especially as a lot of our coverage talked about with South Asian communities, it was really an interesting moment to realize that politics is not just all of the X people vote Y candidate, and to see how, like, what it really took for kind of a new and up and coming candidate to find his feet and to find inroads into all the different angles of the community. Well, thanks, Surbi. Such an interesting story, such an exciting time to be writing about the South Asian community in New York. And now, Kareem, I want to pivot to you to a very different kind of story. Yours is one of my top stories of 2025. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this really incredible piece that is your number one story for the year?
Yes, so this is the depressing part of the podcast.
No.
My pick is a piece that, in the interest of self-promotion, again, I commissioned. It was a piece called Confessions of a Syrian Barrel Bomber. And to my knowledge, it's the first profile by a colonel in Bashar al-Assad's Air Force who piloted helicopters that dropped barrel bombs on civilians during the course of the war. I'm not aware of any other similar profiles or interviews of that particular category of war criminal. So for those who don't know, barrel bombs are these barrels filled with explosives and TNT and other assorted material to carry out violence that was essentially packed into these barrels and dropped from helicopters flying over Syrian cities. They were so inaccurate that they had to drop them far behind enemy lines in order to avoid accidentally dropping them on their own troops. And so their use is in and of itself possibly a war crime. Thousands of these were dropped over the course of the war, killed tens of thousands of Syrian civilians, particularly in Aleppo and Idlib. And this profile is drawn from interviews with one of the men who piloted one of these helicopters on a regular basis and was ready to do so again on the eve of the December 8 offensive last year that led to the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah, it is such a stunning profile. I think one of the things that really stood out to me was just the candor with which this colonel spoke to our reporter, and all of the little details that came out of this. I'm wondering if you can share some of your favorite details. I mean, it's hard to say favorite details, but the things that really stuck with you, a detail or two from the story.
Yeah, it's those individual little snippets of his personality that come across that really stuck with me too. There's a portion of it where he talks about while they're flying, they keep repeating this verse from the Quran that loosely translated means we have sent you as a mercy to mankind. And essentially what they were convincing themselves that they were doing was that they were bombing the bad guys, right? They were bombing the terrorists and therefore protecting Syrians and protecting the country from their evil. But the man himself talks about how he refused to look at images after his bombing runs. He didn't want to see the after effect. He talked about a couple of bombings, and we talked about the civilian casualties in them, including a family of 9 that died in one particular bombing that he remembers. But he often avoided looking at the imagery or trying to follow the media discourse around these barrel bomb attacks. So he was pretty convinced of what he was doing. There's a very creepy detail in which he talks about how, nobody saw Syria through his eyes because he flew so many sorties over the country that he's so familiar with the rooftops. And sometimes on his way back, he would fly over his own house to see if he can glimpse his wife or his family in the house. One of the themes I've always kind of wondered around, particularly in Syria, is what drives people to commit acts of such extraordinary evil. And I don't think this essay answers it exactly, but it reminds us that the people who commit these acts are people. There's inherent goodness, I believe, in humanity, but there's also inherent evil. And this man is an amalgamation of that. He shows that ordinary people can be driven to justify acts of insane violence and acts of depravity, and still see themselves as human. When many of us, we often use words like unspeakable or unthinkable crime, right? When referring to atrocities or referring to large-scale violence. But I think what essays like this show is that it is actually quite thinkable and it is quite explainable, and we just need to delve deeper into the psyche of people who carry them out.
Yeah, this one hit really close to home for me. My father was a helicopter pilot in the Vietnam War. And as the child of someone who went through quite a similar experience, I mean, they weren't dropping barrel bombs in Vietnam, but just coming to terms with it over the 50 years since the war, this piece really hit home to me that it ends, as you said, with this kind of wild detail where as he's on his way to his mission, he flies over his fiance's house, and she'd wait for him on the rooftops, keeping track of the flights. And he remembered exactly how many minutes it was. And these sorts of things these really are, these kind of unspeakable acts of violence are committed by individuals, but also that there's an element of it that is social, right? It's a regime, decisions that are made so far from the individual that their own culpability can be questioned in ways. So I think it's a really nuanced and a really beautiful piece, and maybe not the most cheerful Christmas reading, but definitely, if our listeners have missed this one to go back and give a listen to, or a read to, I guess.
One of the things that has always struck me, and the idea of the most important moments in parenting, for example, are garbage moments, right? They're moments where actually you're not really necessarily, it's not like the big trip that you take your family on and that's what your kids remember. It's like little moments in between that they will remember. And I thought that the fact that the pilot remembered those moments, moments like when he was flying over his fiance's house, rather than the actual act of going in and bombing a bunch of people leading to their deaths, was very insightful into the human psyche. But I love the personal connection that it has to you. I mean, I'd love to know what your favorite essay of the year was.
Yeah, so my favorite essay of the year also has a shady character at its core, someone who is unapologetically violent and probably pretty evil, but slightly less depressing. It's a bit more of a yarn. It's this wonderful piece out of Sierra Leone about a Dutch drug kingpin who has set up shop in Freetown. And it is a yarn of a story. I love this piece because it has everything you could possibly want in a great story. There are barroom brawls, there are false identities, there are cocaine submarines. The authors really spent months digging in to try and figure out how this Dutch cocaine kingpin, this guy named Jos Leidekers, ended up in Sierra Leone after fleeing authorities in Europe, and how he managed to insinuate himself into the very highest echelons of the country's elite, making friends. I mean, he made friends with everyone from port officials, very handy if you need to smuggle cocaine, to politicians, to really, I mean, when we say the top echelons, he became engaged to the president's daughter. And as he did so, he was able to reset up his empire, which had formerly gone through the port in Rotterdam, which is one of the largest ports in the world and one of the busiest, and formerly a huge cocaine hub. But as technology improved and as Europol was kind of closing in on him and his network, he was able to escape. And now he's set up shop in Freetown. And because he's so entrenched with the government, they are just like thrilled to have this man and all of his cocaine money there. And what I love about it is, of course, there's like all these twists and turns. There are Afrobeats stars who are flown in on private jets to perform at a private birthday party at his resort. Like, there's all sorts of wild additional little details. But what the authors really do, and what I love about it, is they show how the corruption in West Africa is really making it open for business for these kinds of transnational criminal networks. So, you know, stuff is brought in through the ports on the coast and then brought in and crosses the Sahara, ends up in Europe, being ferried back and forth on small Zodiac boats. It's a really cool story. It's a really fun one that I definitely recommend. And as a reminder to all our listeners, I will be putting links to all of these stories in the show notes. So if you want something to read over the Christmas break, it is there for you. Now we are going from long reads to cultural highlights. All the things that got us chatting in our Monday meetings when we probably should have been discussing production schedules. So let's flip this the other way around. Kareem, you told me that your big cultural highlight for the year is actually a video game. You want to tell us a little bit more?
Have been unmasked as an in-house nerd. So yes, it's a video game called Clair Obscur. It's developed by a French studio. And it's just, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it every week since I played it back in April or March, I forget. But to give you the cliff notes on the game, it's set in a post-apocalyptic Paris called Lumière, which has become an island. We start the game in the middle of this event called the Gommage. We take a brief stroll to the harbor, which looks out onto the ocean, and in the far distance is a giant monolith with the number 34 scrawled on it. And next to the monolith is this kind of dreamlike mythical figure that we learn is called the Paintress. Every year at the Gommage, the Paintress wakes up, erases the number that's on the monolith, and puts one number lower. So it's going to go from 34 to 33. And what happens when that occurs is that when the numbers change to 33, everyone who is 33 years of age and above is going to suddenly die. They disappear in a puff of dust and roses. And your task as the protagonist of the game, is to lead an adventure that takes place every year. It's an expedition that aims to cross the sea, go battle the Paintress, and end this nightmare where every year an entire segment of the population just gets eradicated as a result of the Paintress scrawling this number. Now, what we discover over the course of the game is that the world that we inhabit, this post-apocalyptic Paris, is actually a painting. It's a painting that has come to life after the main protagonist of the game has died. But this protagonist was himself a child painter. And because he loved his art so much, the painting got infused with kind of a fragment of his soul. And the painting itself came alive. And his mother, instead of mourning his death, decides to inhabit the painting herself and to perpetuate it and to continue to exist in it.
Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. I had no idea that video games like this existed. In my mind, as someone who plays zero video games, like I'm thinking, like bang bang shoot 'em up or like driving video games. So when you described this, I was like, wow, this is like the plot of like a sci-fi novel or some beautiful kind of, I don't know, like post-apocalyptic magical realism. So I'm curious, what's the experience like to play something like this? Are you in it for the plot? Are you in it for the leveling up? Are you there for the graphics? What's the appeal of a game like this?
Well, I will say that this particular storyline is something that I haven't experienced in, I grew up with video games. I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s. And
Yeah, Grand Theft Auto and yeah.
yeah. And video games when the 90s was just like 10 years ago, right? I grew up with video games, and this particular story is like nothing I've ever experienced before. The artwork, the voice lines, the surrealism. I mean, you are really walking in a surrealist painting, and most of the game takes place in the environs of this painting, right? You're in the painting itself, and so you're walking through these dreamlike sequences and settings that were the product of the imagination of the young man who died, and his soul infused the painting and brought it to life. So you're walking through it and you're experiencing a living artwork. It's teaching you something about this part of us that we give to the work that we do and to the creations that we put out in the world. And honestly, it also just helped me come to terms with grief. Grief for my father's death and how I managed to move on after it. Grief for the lives lost and all the conflicts we cover and the state of the world that we live in. And, ultimately there is no really solution to it. And in the game, what happens is that you kind of keep coming up against the void left by this grief and kind of bumping into it. All the characters are grieving in some way, shape, or form. And the cliche is always that video games are escapism, right? But I think the ultimate message of the game, you have to make a choice, and spoiler alert, but you have to make a choice towards the end, whether to preserve the painting and allow the characters to continue to inhabit it, or force the characters that the painting was made for to help them grieve, force them to leave it and to destroy the painting so that they can grieve in their own world. And neither of them really comes across as a good choice, because if you make the sensible choice to help the family grieve in the real world, then you're going to be destroying the lives of all the characters that you met over the course of the game and who you come to believe have agency and have choices over their own lives and want to live their lives. It's just one of those incredible experiences that has really stayed with me for the entirety of the year. And I urge anyone, I mean, even if you're not really into video games, to just check out some video clips. And the music there is absolutely incredible. There's a song called Lumière that they made that is one of the most playful, beautiful French songs I've ever heard. It's got something in there for everybody. The game mechanics themselves are fun, but it's just like any other game. It's really the beautiful story and the themes and how it made me feel afterwards that really stuck with me.
Yeah, I have to say, this persuaded me that maybe I would want to try and play a video game, which is really saying something as someone who has a sliver of free time between work and two small children. So kudos to you on a persuasive cultural pick for the year. I think
yeah, I mean, I'll just say this. I mean, it's an art form like any other, and it's obviously it's bigger as an industry now than film and television and music even combined. It's really worth your while to try and explore it as an art form, and I think you'll end up finding that you have meaningful experiences there too.
All right. Hey, Serbi, tell me a little bit about your cultural pick for this year. I think you are going to be the person to share a little bit about some live music with us.
Yeah, so anybody who knows me, if I'm not working, I'm out there watching a new film or attending a concert or a new play. So it was a very tough, but also in a way easy choice for me to pick the biggest cultural moment. And I will explain why. But basically, I attended this big concert by this Punjabi singer called Karan Aujla. It was at Prudential Center in New Jersey, just across the river from the city, and in August. And because I'm from Delhi, where, Punjabi music is a big part of our culture in the city. So I grew up with Punjabi music, but that means I've also seen the rise of it. It used to be only limited to Delhi, surrounding areas, Punjab, where it originates from, in small pockets of the diaspora. But now, it was really interesting. It was an experience to see, and I had gone on a similar concert of another big singer called Diljit Dosanjh last year, to see, these artists now fill these huge stadiums and arenas and all over the world. So I went to one of those concerts, and what was also interesting to me was that apart from Bollywood, I think the next big cultural export from India, I think, would be Punjabi music. But it's also not like completely Indian, because Punjabi identity is so transnational. It's like the region is divided between India and Pakistan, and there is a huge diaspora in the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and other parts of the world. So there is a huge market for it.
So I'm super interested. All right, so there's all this cultural context around it, but what was it like to be in the stadium? Tell me a little bit about the concert and what the vibe was like, what the crowd was like. Give us a little bit of an insight into what it felt like to be in the Prudential Center during this big concert.
It was great. Like, so many people you see. I think a lot of people travel from like all around the region, maybe the tri-state area, different parts of the country perhaps. But what really stood out to me was, so this concert was happening a few months after the military conflict between India and Pakistan. And here I was in the stadium, I'm Indian, but we may not like agree on politics, but there were like Indians and Pakistanis and from the larger Punjabi diaspora all in one space. So you really saw the power of culture and music, like bringing people together. And there was a moment, what happens typically at these concerts is, especially, when with artists who have these cross-border fan followings, is that people bring like the flags of their countries and they're like waving them. There was a moment, in the concert where these two guys, they were waving this Pakistani flag. And I was wondering, will Karan acknowledge it? Will he not? There's these tensions. And then he does, like, he acknowledges them. And then, he's like, we're brothers, we come from the same land, and we're the same people, and we share the same roots. So that was really interesting to see that after this almost war that the two countries had fought and with these tensions. And Karan is from like a small village in India, from the Indian part of Punjab. And he's based in Canada now, but he's still pretty much rooted. So, you see that, okay, how are people going to respond to, and especially art is going to respond to this. But one can really see that how culture really brings people together. So that was like a highlight for me.
That sounds so fun and so interesting as well, to be like out at a show and really just like vibing with the music, but then also trying to read the political tension, the political grit in the air. So super interesting. Thank you. All right, Lisa, you're up next. Tell us, what is the one thing in culture this year that's really stuck with you?
Well, I will preface by saying that I've been in a bit of an anhedonic state for the past year or so, largely due to the fact that I cover the Middle East. And it's actually been I haven't been to a lot of museum exhibitions or films. I mean, I do go to the movies a lot, but I tend mostly to see art house cinema. All that is by way of saying that I do have trouble focusing when I'm so worried about the world. So I take comfort in one of, I think, the greatest works of art ever made for television, or two, actually. And those are the BBC productions of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, a limited series that was broadcast in 1979, and Smiley's People, which was broadcast in 1982. The acting is absolutely stunning. Just a kind of a stillness or a gesture. You cannot watch, they're very complex, they're very demanding of the viewer. You cannot watch these series with a double screen. You can't be there with your iPhone scrolling and keeping one eye on the television. You have to give all of your attention to the series, and you'll still probably miss things. That's why they bear rewatching. I watched these series in real time when they were first broadcast when I was a kid, and I didn't, of course, really understand them, but I was very gripped all the same. And then I read the books later on, and then I find myself every year or 2 years rewatching both series. It's a serious investment of time, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like something completely absorbing, complex, fascinating. There's always something new to see and notice. I picked up on something this time that I had never noticed before, in the way that the position of women in the workplace is very, very subtly commented upon. I just spent a couple of weeks just deeply focused on rewatching those two TV series. Now, they're both on YouTube in Canada. You can't watch them on YouTube for free in the UK, but I think you can find it on Apple TV. And this is the version where Alec Guinness plays George Smiley. And there's a cast of actors that, I started going down a rabbit hole looking up each of the actors, and they all have astonishing personal stories and background.
Lisa, would you recommend it to people who are kind of like new to the spy genre, like fans of shows like Slow Horses, as you know I am?
Yes, I would. Again, Slow Horses is brilliant. And certainly Mick Herron, who wrote the Slough House series, has said several times that he's very influenced by Le Carré. But with Le Carré, with these particular adaptations of Le Carré, you really need to know something about the Cold War and really pay attention. So
I would say a really good intermediary between the two. If you need to go, if you're trying to get to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy from Slow Horses, would be to rewatch the FX series The Americans, which I think is one of the greatest television shows ever made. And is also, it has that same quality which you described, Lisa, which I love, which is you cannot watch it with another screen. And I realized that we are in an era where scripting for television in particular is designed so that the characters are telling you everything they are doing all of the time so that you don't have to be looking at the screen in a way. But what I love about The Americans is there's so much of it is happening in subtle gestures, in little moments. It's also just so brilliant. And I love it. But it gets you, I think it gets you, Kareem, to answer your question, I think it gets you back into it'll tell you a ton about the Cold War, and then you can slide all the way into Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is way more subtle.
Erin, what was your moment?
Oh, mine is a little bit more of an IRL moment. So this fall, I had the chance to go to Florence. I live pretty close. That sounds like a brag, but it's an hour flight for me from Tunis. And I met a friend there. And one of the reasons why we went was to see this blockbuster show of paintings by Fra Angelico, who's a 15th century monk and one of the great painters of the early Renaissance. And I had seen Fra Angelico paintings before. One of his most famous is an Annunciation painting, that being the scene of the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary to tell her that she will be the mother of Jesus, I suppose. One of the sort of all-time great early Renaissance paintings. There's a beautiful little barn swallow perched on a wire in the back of it that I think about all the time. But I hadn't really dug into Fra Angelico's work that much. And the exhibition was over two different locations. One was this big, fancy palace downtown that had all of these big altarpieces that they had flown in from hundreds of different locations. This was truly a miraculous show that they'd put together. But really the thing that stood out to me that I thought was just stunning was they opened the monastery of San Marco, which is where Fra Angelico, who was a Dominican friar, lived out his days. And he had painted the walls of the monks' cells with these incredible, really simple, really spare frescoes that were, it's been a long time since I have cried looking at art. Kareem, we were talking about this the other day. You can share about it if you want, but I remember one of the first times that I actually cried looking at a painting was looking at some of Francisco de Goya's black paintings in the Museo del Prado in Madrid. There's one of a dog that's looking up over a berm, and I don't know, it just hit something in my deep in my core that made me cry. But these frescoes in the monks' cells were so spare and so beautiful. And there was one in particular that is of Jesus on the cross with Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary at his feet. And the women are treated with just such humanity and such deep emotion. I don't know. It was really stunning. So there were two things that stood out more largely about it. One was just the power of that. But I have a super special skill and maybe terrible predilection when I'm traveling, which is I love to sidle up to tour guides who are speaking one of my other languages and listen in. And then if anybody gets after me, I'm I'm just an American. And while I was there was a tour guide who was giving a really interesting tour to a couple in Russian. And Russian's my second language. And she was showing them these frescoes, and she was talking about how the great Russian poet Anna Akhmatova spent a winter in Florence over 100 years ago in 1915, right at the edge of things being really unsettled in Russia, and that she had come almost every day to San Marco to look at these frescoes, and that she drew immense comfort from them and actually used them as the inspiration for one of her really incredible pieces about Dante, who is also a Florentine. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And as I was walking around Florence, which really hasn't changed in, 500 years, and how this incredible poet 100 years ago at the turn, right before just a revolution that would upend her life, the life of her country, really the whole world, how she was finding this grounding in these paintings that, again, 200, 400 years earlier were having an impact on the people who were, again, changing the world as they were creating the Renaissance. And I don't know, there was something that was really comforting about it.
I was gonna ask you which part of it made you cry. Like, was it the beauty of the painting itself? Was it the setting? Was it amalgamation of everything? Was it like a memory that it evoked in you, or a particular feeling that sort of like your core responding to a particular detail in the painting?
Yeah, it's such a, and I think you probably, I think we've all experienced this at some point where like, it's a combination of things. We've all seen beautiful things and we're like, wow, that's beautiful. But I think for me, it was this kind of, the setting, especially because it's these very spare stone monks' cells. And to walk in, and for me, it was the image, actually it was an image of the Last Supper. And Mary Magdalene is present, which is fascinating. She's over to the side and kneeling. And just the sort of tenderness of it, and these, I don't know, you could see it in the brushstrokes, this, as Fra Angelico was working out this completely new way of seeing the world, which was happening in the Renaissance, and that he was doing it not for his rich patrons, right? These weren't the altarpieces that were going to go in the family chapels of the Medicis. This was for his brothers, these Dominicans who, embraced poverty and who had nothing but that these beautiful gestures of devotion. I don't know, there was something in it that was just extremely moving.
I read almost nothing about that particular exhibition, and now you're making me feel the most intense FOMO. But besides the frescoes, were there any other objects in the exhibition that stayed with you?
Yes. So in San Marco, which was, I found out was one of the first publicly accessible libraries in Europe. The Dominicans left it open for scholars, not of, necessarily like royal or noble families, to come and study these works of ancient Greek and Hebrew and Latin. But in the library were these songbooks that Fra Angelico had illuminated. And I happened to be on this trip with one of my very best friends, who is a scholar of early music and an incredible baritone singer. And at some point we were looking at one of these manuscripts, which is annotated not in Western notation that we think of when we open like a songbook now, but in a kind of notation called neumes, which if you've ever seen like Gregorian chant, kind of, I think technically if he's listening to this, he'll kill me because I don't have it right, but it is in neumes. So they're these like weird stacked things. And I sort of jokingly said, Brian, sing me the neumes. And it's, it's illuminated, it's in this crazy Latin script. And he just looked at it for a minute, and then, much to the delight of all of these elderly Italians who were in this library, started singing it and sight read the neumes, sight read this beautiful piece of prayer song from a 15th century manuscript. thought, what an amazing thing about culture and about writing and the power of writing, that somebody from 500 years ago put what they were thinking and what they were feeling down on a piece of vellum. And 500 years later, this soul from a completely different time and place could interpret it and create something that sounded beautiful and touched, I don't know, touched the listeners too. So I don't know. I loved it.
Yeah. You know, this reminds me of an ex of mine from many years ago who used to listen a lot to Haydn. And one day he was sitting and listening and he said, I should say that for context that my ex he was a tech guy, and he was listening and he's with his eyes closed and he murmured, I have no idea how he composed this music without a computer. You know, so I think that what you're feeling about listening to your friend chant music, reading the notes, you know, 500 years ago, and making it feeling that it was so contemporary is something similar.
Also, is your friend taking requests for accompaniment on such tours in the future?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really funny after, I mean, because he just did it as a joke, but then afterwards a bunch of people clapped and were like, encore, encore, and he just slinked away into the corner. And everyone was like, how did you do that? He's like, I have a master's degree in this. But it was pretty special. Well, thank you for those fascinating and amazing cultural insights. I think we've given everyone something new to look for this holiday season, whether that's picking up a Punjabi album, checking out a really great series to watch, or a brand new video game. I definitely think I'm going to have some fun cultural experiences thanks to this. So now I want to transition to our last little bit here, which is thingies. I always love this kind of thing. I just want to know, super quick, you guys tell me, what is the one thingy that has made your life better this year? Serbi, hit me with a thingy.
I think my thingy here is, so I don't do a lot of makeup in real life. It's like reserved only for very special occasions. And I don't like using lipsticks every day. But what I discovered this year, or I mean, I introduced in my life, was the Clinique Almost lipstick, which is like a perfect mix between a lip balm and a lip tint, or yeah, I would want people to look that up. But I think that's my thingy. Like now that is like an essential. Like I need one always with me. So that has been life-changing in 2025, I would say.
I am here for that. I am here for a lip tint making 2025 great. Actually, one of my top thingies of the year is the Bisou Balm from Violette FR, which is like this French makeup brand. Also an excellent, if you are not a big makeup wearer, 10 out of 10. So we do Clinique Almost lipstick, Violette FR Bisou Balm. My 3-year-old does not go out of the house without it on. She requests a little rouge à lèvres every morning, which is absolutely ridiculous. Thank you for that excellent thingy, Serbi. All right, Karim, what is your thingy?
Okay, so a couple of very small thingies. So I gave up smoking this year, a habit I picked up reporting on the Middle East. Our therapy was cigarettes and Jack Daniels. And I discovered Zyn pouches. So they're little pouches that you kind of like put in your mouth and between the gum and the lips. They have nicotine. I discovered them after actually reading a big piece about it in the New Yorker for my highbrow friends. And they talked a lot about it and then about nicotine replacement products in general. And it's really worked with me. I haven't smoked since July.
Hey, Mabruk, that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. And to augment the suddenly smelling not like an ashtray, I've rediscovered my love for Aleppo soap, which I highly recommend if you can get access to it. It's absolutely phenomenal. It makes you feel cleaner than you've ever felt. And if you stick one inside your wardrobe, your clothes also come out smelling like Aleppo soap. But they smell amazing and you smell amazing. So highly, highly recommend.
All right, Zyn pouches and Aleppo soap. Here for it. Lisa, hit me with your thingy.
I'm picking up on Karim's pursuit of better health. I took up jogging this year with the help of an NHS app called Couch to 5K. The Yanks, of course, have done their own version. So the concept of this app is there's a voice that says, okay, run for 30 seconds, now walk for 60 seconds. And ultimately, you get up to running 5K without stopping. My brother-in-law assured me that I would get there and that I'd feel the euphoria. And after about 11 months, I did. But while I was listening to the little voice in my ear, year is I accidentally chose the American version, and it drove me nuts. It was this incredibly cheerful woman who was saying things like, "Hey there, awesome runner. You're a great person for getting up and going running, and you're awesome. You're a rock star." And I was like, shut up. So I switched over to the British NHS GOAT Couch to 5K app, and it was very low key. There was this guy, with not a lot of inflection in his voice, who was saying things like, "You're doing really well. Go ahead." And he got me there. And I am just all for the British understatement as a means of pursuing fitness. I am now a jogger 3 times a week. I do my 5K, even in this minus 25 icy weather in Montreal. And it helps.
This would only be more complete if the guy says, "Mind the gap." So, we can only hope.
Well done, you. Well done.
He does. He does say "well done" at the end, actually, but not "well done, rock star." It's like, "Well done, you did it."
There's no "you go, girl."
None of that appalling "you go, girl" stuff. Yes, well done.
Amazing. Well, my thingy this year, it's a recipe, actually. So I had a long, hard think about my thingies and the thingies that make my life better. And this is truly something that drastically improved my life with almost no effort. And it is this amazing pasta. It is simple. It is delicious. I can get it made in like 15 minutes flat if my water boils fast enough. And my 1-year-old and my 3-year-old will eat it. So let me hit you with this. You boil while you're boiling your pasta water, throw a crap ton of olive oil in a shallow pan. I don't know, maybe a half cup sounds good. A lot. You want a lot of olive oil. Throw in 2 slices of chopped garlic, a bay leaf, a big pinch of fennel seeds, and a big pinch of red pepper flakes. Or don't do the red pepper flakes if you live in Canada where cinnamon is spicy. And then you let that warm up and infuse. And then while your pasta is boiling, you chop up a preserved lemon, a tablespoon of capers, some lemon zest, and you take 3 tins of sardines, and you floop them in with the olive oil, and you nudge it around until the sardines fall apart. And then once the pasta's done, you toss it in with the olive oil and all that good stuff, shave a little cheese on top. Mwah. It is perfection. And yeah, we call it's apparently an adaptation of a recipe from the Zuni Cafe in California, but they call for canned tuna, and I just go for the sardines because it's got way less mercury and way more flavor. So that is my thingy for the year. I was going to say my jasmine ice cream recipe was my thingy for this year, but that I think is just a brag that I can pluck enough fresh jasmine off the vines in my neighborhood to infuse some cream with it and make ice cream. But if you, dear reader, live in a place with a lot of jasmine, hot tip, you can make ice cream by infusing cream cold with your jasmine. You need a lot of it, though. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. This has been another edition of New Line's Christmas episode, a few of our favorite things. We hope everyone has a very happy holidays, a joyful new year, and we hope to see you back here next week for another edition of The Lead from New Lines Magazine.